Just add it on.
No, I removed it. Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Mandy. I'm the director here at Historic Johnson Farm in Hendersonville, North Carolina. And I know many of you are stuck at home, so I wanted to do a little program for you all that are stuck at home. And I titled it Johnson Farm History Through Photographs. So let me just start sharing my screen here. And so you can see these photographs. Let's see if this works. So in a second, you see a picture of the farmhouse.
Yes.
Okay, and let me X out of this thing. So I know some of you have probably been here before, but this is kind of a centerpiece of the Johnson Farm. This is the farmhouse, and it's called the Johnson Farm, but we need to back up a little bit and go prior to the Johnsons. So a man named Oliver Moss was the original owner of the house and the land. When he bought the land, he bought 500 acres, and there was no house here. He hired a man named Riley Barnett to build the house. The bricks were made here on site. They got mud from the French Broad River, but there was a problem with the bricks when they came out of the kiln. They were all misshapen. So Riley Barnett kind of cobbled them together the best he could. He covered the walls with a layer of parge, which is a mixture of brick dust and lime. And then he went and hand painted all of the lines. You can't really see the lines here, but if you get really close to the house, you can see the lines. So it took a number of years for the house to be completed. It wasn't completed until 1880. And Oliver Moss and his family moved in, and Moss was a tobacco farmer. So he had huge fields of tobacco growing here until 1888, just 8 years after the house was completed and he moved in. The tobacco market started declining in this area. People realized that it was better and easier to grow tobacco on flatter land in different climate, especially towards the eastern part of the state. So Oliver Moss moved his family to Texas, and he sold 310 acres and the house to these guys, Robert and Mary Leverett. They're seated, and they paid $4,000 for the house and a little over 300 acres. So Robert and Mary had 5 children who were all young adults or teenagers by this time. One of their daughters is pictured here, Betty Leverett. So Robert and Mary moved in. They were just running a farm here. They had crops, they had livestock, and their other daughter, besides Betty, was named Sally Leverett. And we have a picture here of Sally much later in her life. But Sally married a man named Leander Johnson, who lived here in Henderson County. So she lived with him, not here at the farm. And they had 2 sons, Vernon and Leander Johnson, Leander Jr. And when Vernon was just 5 and Leander Jr. was still a baby, he wasn't even 1 yet, their father passed away. This was in the 1890s. So Sally tried to make it work on her own, but she ended up coming back to the farmhouse where her parents were still living, and she brought her sons with her. So the 3 Johnsons moved in with the Leveretts. And we have very few pictures of Sally. This is one of maybe 2 or 3 pictures we have of her. She did not like having her picture taken. So here's a picture of her 2 sons. We don't have many pictures of them younger, so the majority of the ones I'll show you are of them later in life. But Vernon is on the left there, Leander is on the right, and usually I can tell them apart because Vernon is wearing glasses in most of the pictures, and he's a little bit taller as well than Leander. Now, Vernon and Leander moved back when they were still very young. They moved here to the farm, and they lived with their mom, their grandparents, and their Aunt Betty. And they started from a young age helping with the farm work. They helped with the animals, and here are pictures of the animals that were usually here at the farm. They always had at least 6 dairy cows. They had usually 2 big horses to do a lot of the farm work. They had pigs, and then they also had chickens. And Vernon, the older son, was always in charge of the pigs because he was a night owl. So he never woke up in time to milk the cows. That was Leander's job. So Leander was in charge of the cows. Vernon was in charge of the pigs. And they both helped with the farm work there. And I said that, and now in this one, Vernon is not wearing glasses, I don't think. So that's Vernon on the left and Leander's on the right. So they farmed and they helped their grandparents and their mom with the house chores. But by 1914, both of their grandparents, Robert and Mary Leverett, had passed away. So it was their mom, their aunt, and the two of them living here in that brick house I showed you. And they started thinking of ways that they could bring in a little more money. So their mom actually opened up the brick house as a summer guest house, a boarding house, if you will, for people to come. They would pay $5 a week to stay in a room in the house, and that $5 included 3 meals a day cooked by Sally herself. So while they were busy with their farming, they also now had to help run this boarding house throughout the summer. Now, here is a picture of Vernon on driving the wagon there with many kids that came to stay during the summer. So this was very much a family vacation spot. Most of the people that stayed here in the boarding house were from Florida. They were escaping the heat and getting up to the cool mountain air. And whole families would come. Whole families would stay in a room together. So sometimes it was tight. Sometimes even the husband or the father of the family would have to go back to Florida sometimes throughout the summer to do work, and the mom and the kids would stay here. But kids that stayed here had so much fun, and we are fortunate that we still are able to keep in touch with some of these kids. Now they are adults, obviously, but they come back to the farm. They bring their kids and grandkids, and they share their memories of the farm. And one of those memories is of riding the wagon around. You can see there's some hay there. So they would help feed the animals. Vernon and Leander would teach them how to milk the cows. One memory we have was that Leander would teach the kids how to slaughter a chicken, and it would scar the children. They remember him out with the chickens, kind of slaughtering them. So that was one memory we have written down. Now the adults, it was a time to relax. Here we see some guests sitting on the back porch, and the driveway used to come up right here where this car is. So people kind of treated the back of the house as the front of the house. But there were rocking chairs on the back porch. As you can see, there was a swing that would have been right behind this tree here. So they would sit, they would relax. Now, sometimes the adults would be asked to help, maybe gather the eggs or pick some vegetables to help the Johnsons with their work. But most of these people were from cities. They saw this as fun and exciting. It wasn't hard labor. And of course, they weren't out in the field all day doing work. Most of these people came summer after summer, and they would go back and tell their friends and family in Florida about the Johnson farm. And the next summer, they might come up as well. So this place was quickly becoming so popular that the Johnsons needed to expand. So in 1923, the Johnson brothers built this building, what we call the boarding house. They called it the White House. It had 11 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms and a huge porch that extended in front of the house and then on the side there. And on that porch, they would hold dances, they would play music, they would make homemade ice cream every Sunday. And then inside it was pretty much just for sleeping. Again, whole families would be in a room together. And everyone that stayed in this house would still go over to the brick house for meals. And again, Sally could be cooking for 40 or more people when people were staying in both of these houses. Vernon and Leander were often kicked out of their rooms during the summer to allow guests to rent their rooms. So in 1933, Vernon built himself a little cottage. We see the front of the cottage in the top picture. Upstairs, it was just one room that had his bed, a little table, some chairs. And then downstairs, which the only way to get downstairs was to walk around outside, was his wood shop. Because Vernon made a lot of furniture, and that's where he did all of his furniture making. And I've heard from many guests that grew up here or spent their summers here that this was kind of the spot where the men and the boys would gather, especially in the evenings. They would gather in this cottage. So I like to call it Vernon's little man cave. Now, Sally died in 1958, and the brothers decided they really couldn't keep up the boarding house business the way she had. So they closed down that White House. They still had some of their regulars staying in the brick house for a week or two, but it was nothing like it had been before. They were not cooking for the guests. Guests were on their own. They could use the kitchen or they could go into town and eat. But it got a lot quieter here. But about the same time, just up the road, a new high school was being built called West Henderson High School. And the brothers started walking over there, and they did the landscaping for the school. They helped build the football stadium, which is still called Johnson Field, named after them. And they became friends with the first principal of the high school, a man named Glenn Marlowe. Now, if you are local to Henderson County, you will probably recognize that name. Glenn Marlowe would later become superintendent of Henderson County Public Schools from 1971 to 1991. And that friendship with Mr. Marlowe and his family, as well as with all the teachers and students at West, led the brothers to start thinking about what they were going to do with their land once they both passed away. I did not mention it, but neither brother ever married or had children. So they really were trying to think of who they could leave the farm to. Now, in the early 1970s, they decided to donate about 40 acres of their land across the street. So that would be to the right of Leander in this picture, to the school system. And the school system was able to build the new junior high school there, Rugby Junior High, and the name Rugby comes from the name of the one-room schoolhouse that Vernon and Leander attended as young boys. So they donated that land to Rugby. So now they had a junior high school across the street, a high school about a half a mile up the road, and the Johnson brothers would go over to the schools. They would take flowers to the teachers. They were at every home football game. They would take, Leander especially would bake cakes, and he would take them to the press box during football games. And they loved the teachers. They loved the students. They would invite students over to see the buildings here at the farm, see how they had lived in days gone by. And one of them, I can't remember which one, I think it was Leander, would walk down every day to the street and wave to the buses as they left Rugby. Now, Vernon passed away in 1978, a few years after Rugby was built, and they had both agreed that they were going to leave the farm to Henderson County Public Schools once they passed away. And so that is what they did. But Leander actually lived until 1987, and students still came on field trips to visit him and the things he had collected through the years. So here we see a picture of Leander towards the end of his life with a class of students that came, and it looks like they brought him a card and a basket of food over here. So Leander died in 1987, and the school system took over. And since the early 90s, we have been doing programs for the public and for school children, because that was Vernon and Leander's goal, that students in the future would be able to come and experience their farm. So we typically do over 30 field trips a school year, see about 2,000 kids, and then we also offer guided tours of the farmhouse to the general public. I'm going to try sometime this week or next to do another one of these programs with pictures of rooms of the house. So it'll kind of be like a virtual tour of the house for those that can't get here right now. But that's about all I have for this. If you have any questions, feel free to email or call, and I will put the email address on the link when I post this video. So thank you for tuning in. I'm going to exit out of that, and I'm going to